Should industrial businesses be forced to pay for polluting the atmosphere? The European Union thinks so, but a vote in the European Parliament this week has left the EU's main mechanism for reducing carbon dioxide emissions, well, in disarray. MEPs voted down a proposal from the Commission to delay an auction of so-called polluter permits, which the Commission said was necessary to increase their cost and encourage industry to reduce emissions. Here's our very own Joko.
Cutting the level of carbon emissions from industry has been the driving force behind the European Union's battle against global warming. In order to hit a 20% reduction target by 2020, they came up with the idea of a carbon market. Great in theory, but after 8 years, the project is at risk of going up in smoke. Some believe it was doomed from the start.
It's always been dead in the water. It's really time for the EU now to put its energy and impetus in alternative policies, and that's what investors want to see before they all flee away. The EU ETS is not synonymous just with climate action. There are many other things that the EU could be doing.
The EU emissions trading system, the world's largest carbon market, was set up in 2005. The idea to put a price on carbon and let industry decide whether to clean up their act or pay for their own emissions. The problem, the price of carbon has slumped from nearly €30 a tonne in 2008 to less than €5, and with it, removed any incentive for companies to invest in cleaner technologies. This German steelworks company just over the border from Strasbourg decided the way forward was to invest heavily in green technology. As a result, it's cut its CO2 emissions by 25% since 2005 and is leading the way in the electric steelmaking industry.
We have been implementing a very strict discipline about this carbon consumption, and we are still on the market. We are still producing steel, and we are still making profit at the end of the year in this industry where it is so difficult to make profit at the present time.
BSW is one of the success stories, but it hasn't come cheap, particularly in a recession when competing against American and Chinese companies who don't operate in a carbon market. In order to fix the current crisis, the European Commission proposed intervening in the market to prop up the price of carbon, calling on MEPs to back the plan.
I'm really worried and uncertain about what the future holds. Maybe this week's vote sends out a signal that Europe is turning its back on doing anything about global warming and no longer cares about the future, about the need to develop these low-carbon technologies. If that's the case, then we are cutting our own throats.
But fears that an increase in the carbon price might boost energy costs, which would then be passed on to consumers, resulted in MEPs voting against the proposal.
I voted against because this is a short-term solution, which is not really a solution. I think that ETS is facing problems, but that they need structural changes.
More than half of Britain's Tory MEPs also voted against the plan, to howls of hypocrisy from their coalition partners. The Liberal Democrats say David Cameron's claim to care about the environment, highlighted by this trip to the Arctic, is now all but a distant memory.
Joko reporting. Now, the carbon trading system, it hasn't really worked since it was launched in 2005 because the price has just collapsed. This vote by the MEPs really seems to be the nail in the coffin for it.
Well, we needed more time to reform it. There's no doubt it needs reform, but we wanted more time to do that. And the government was trying to lobby MEPs to support the Commission, the British government.
Sure, we'll come on to that.
Tory MEPs didn't vote for
that. But it's over now.
Well, I hope not, because what else do we do at this moment in time? We have to encourage businesses to get into new technologies. And the problem is, what's happened now, British business is at a disadvantage because they have a minimum carbon price that other people across Europe don't.
I'll come on to that in a minute. But it suggests to me that the European Parliament, by voting the way it did, is in tune with the changing mood of Europe. This is a Europe that's in recession. It's a Europe with 25 million unemployed, with companies closed. I'm just looking at the big companies that have closed in France, including steel mills. The priority is jobs, growth, living standards, not some theoretical carbon price.
Yes, and we have to also look at what happens about imports, and I think that's something we have to look at as well, whether there should be some sort of carbon tax on imports, but that's another issue. This was something this is something the British government was lobbying for, and big industries such as Shell and Philips and Tesco, and Labour MEP supported them. You didn't, Timothy.
No, I didn't, and I followed my whip. I was not rebelling because the whip of my delegation was to
Not your government,
vote
though.
Against this. That's perfectly true. We did not agree with the government on this one. And I think that, as you have not agreed on Working Time Directive and other things in the past...
No, but let me cut to the chase here. You're in a position where you're part of a party in power in Britain, which is implementing its own unilateral, very high carbon floor price, very high, and that's your government's policy. And you vote against a much lower one in the European Parliament. How does that work?
No. What we said was that the whole system needs a massive reform. The way to reform it is certainly in the short term anyway, the Parliament not making this final decision, but to actually refer it back for further debate and discussion and to get something which actually can sustain. The only reason we are where we are right now is, as you suggested, because the economy in Europe is in a difficult state. That's why the price has fallen. The actual market that we set up in 2005 no longer is operating effectively.
The price fell from day one.
Well, but we need now...
2005.
And it halved after you voted against it.
But we need now to look at it again and come up with a more sensible approach to this. It's not... This government is doing a lot, as you well know. Carbon capture storage. We're doing all kinds of things in terms of alternative energy sources, everything that we need to do in this country.
Let's just get to the position where this
is not
finds
the
itself
way
now vis-a-vis Europe. And there's bipartisan support in this. Your parties between us have now got us into a position where there is effectively no European floor price on carbon now that European industry will have to pay. And you've lumbered British industry with a floor price of £16 a tonne, heading to £30 a tonne by 2020. Yes. And yet both of you... No, let me finish. You all come onto this show and talk about rebalancing the economy, more manufacturing, get away from services and financial, and you just put an albatross around their neck.
No, that's not true. I mean, the short-term fix that was proposed here would not have dealt with the underlying problems of the scheme. We have to look at the fundamentals of this. I'm sorry, it would sound good maybe, but it wasn't going to work. No, that's the reason why we voted the way we did.
No, I've moved on from that. My point to you is that even if you'd reformed the European scheme, European companies would be subject to a much lower floor price for carbon than British companies because your government volunteered a much higher one and they did it with Labour support.
Yeah, and governments can make those decisions. So but the real marketplace isn't just the question of the competition between the European countries. The real marketplace is our competition in Europe against China, against India, against elsewhere in the world.
Their energy prices are much lower.
But nevertheless, that is what has to be... When we're doing something on a European basis, we have to have something that actually works, and this does not, and has not been working.
It's not working in Britain either. We've lumbered our companies with a higher cost of energy. We've already lost the aluminium business in this country. That's gone from these shores. What's next?
We have to try and make sure that companies do invest in new technology, though, Andrew, and it was one way of trying to achieve that. And I agree with you. The carbon price has dropped dramatically and it has caused huge problems. Should we stick to having
our own? It's just came in this month. Are we right to have our own £16 a tonne carbon floor price?
Well, it would have been better had we had the support in the European Parliament for the measures the Commission was proposing.
But it's now going to rise to £30 a tonne over the next 7 years. Are we right to do that?
Well, we don't know. It's very difficult to predict what's going to happen in terms of the price. That's one of the reasons why we need to look at this again.
Excuse me. This is government policy. This is an administered floor price to get it up to £30. It's not a market price. It's a government-mandated minimum price.
Yes, and each government has to take its own view on how it wants to play this. I see no reason why national governments cannot make these decisions if they wish. There are implications whichever way you make that decision, but why not? I see there's no problem. But the European, what was proposed by the Commission, was not going to work. And therefore, as far as we were concerned, we wanted to have another look at it. And that is what's happening.
The British one will work.
And the British one may well work.
But now British businesses are at a massive disadvantage to European competitors, and that's a real problem.
But I think this is a short term. I think things are going to move on. We're not at the end of this at all.
Maybe industry is going to move on out of here. I invite you both, because it doesn't happen in these metropolitan circles, to read the statements of the people representing industries in Teesside.
Well, I think also read the Financial Times this morning, the opinion comment, the comment from that newspaper this morning, which I think is quite helpful.
FT's not really plugged into Teesside. Earlier this week, the European Commission questioned George Osborne's planned tax relief for the Britain